The air mattress beneath me squeaked with every movement as I shifted uncomfortably on the concrete floor of Ernest's garage, surrounded by dusty Christmas decorations and the lingering smell of motor oil. Outside, Austin's December wind rattled the metal door, while inside the main house, I could hear my half-sister Chloe's laughter echoing from the warm guest bedroom that Alice had declared was too nice for someone like me. It was Christmas Eve, 2023, and at 35 years old, I was sleeping next to a lawnmower because my own family considered me such a failure that I didn't deserve a real bed in their house. My phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. with a call from Janet Mills, my business partner, and the only person who knew the truth about what I'd been planning for the past 3 days. "Clara, it's done." Her voice crackled through the speaker, barely audible over the garage's poor cell reception. "The mortgage transfer is complete. As of right now, you officially own the house you're sleeping outside of. The deed will be processed first thing Monday morning, and the foreclosure notice is ready to be served whenever you give the word." I stared up at the garage ceiling, past the cobwebs and forgotten storage boxes, processing the surreal reality of my situation. The same family that had just forced me to sleep in their garage like an unwanted pet had no idea that their disappointment daughter had just become their landlord. The house they'd been using as a weapon against my self-esteem, the home they'd leveraged to make me feel small and worthless, now legally belonged to me thanks to their own financial mismanagement and my ability to write checks they couldn't even imagine. Clara Kuntz, the family screw-up who never amounted to anything, had just purchased their mortgage debt for $340,000 cash through my investment company, Kunstech Holdings. The irony was so perfect, it felt like the universe had a sense of humor about justice and timing. 3 months of missed payments, a foreclosure notice they'd been hiding from each other, and a desperate need for someone to save them from bankruptcy had created the exact opportunity I needed to flip the script on 35 years of being treated like a second-class family member. The journey to this moment had started when I was 7 years old, and Ernest married Alice, creating a blended family that never quite blended for me. Alice brought her social climbing ambitions, and her daughter Chloe, who became the golden child while I was relegated to the role of the weird stepdaughter who didn't fit their vision of suburban success. They lived in a beautiful 4-bedroom house in West Austin's Tarrytown neighborhood, complete with a swimming pool and 3-car garage, funded by Ernest's moderately successful plumbing business and Alice's real estate commissions. What they didn't know was that the awkward teenager who'd spent high school coding in her bedroom instead of socializing had grown up to become the founder and CEO of Kunstech, a software company specializing in automated inventory management systems for retail chains. My company's algorithms were running behind the scenes at major retailers across Texas, generating recurring revenue that had made me worth 8 figures before I turned 30. But I'd never told them about my success, partly because they'd never asked, and partly because I'd grown tired of their assumptions about my life. Alice had perfected the art of subtle cruelty over the years, always framing her insults as concern or practical observations. Clara just doesn't seem to have direction in life. She'd tell relatives at family gatherings, while praising Chloe's mediocre college performance like she was curing cancer. Ernest, caught between his new wife and his daughter from his first marriage, had chosen the path of least resistance, which usually meant going along with Alice's treatment of me as the family's cautionary tale. The sleeping arrangement for this Christmas visit had been the final straw. When I'd arrived from my downtown Austin penthouse to spend the holidays with family, Alice had informed me that the guest room was reserved for Chloe, who was home from UT with her boyfriend, and that I could make myself comfortable in the garage. She'd said it with that particular smile that pretended to be helpful while actually being devastating. The same expression she'd worn when suggesting I find more realistic career goals, or when introducing me to neighbors as Ernest's daughter who's still figuring things out. But now, lying on this uncomfortable air mattress surrounded by their stored junk, I was the one holding all the cards they didn't even know were in play. Growing up in the Kuntz-Jones household meant living in a perpetual state of not quite belonging, like being a permanent houseguest in your own family. When Ernest married Alice in 1995, I was 7 years old and still grieving my mother's death from cancer 2 years earlier. Alice brought her 5-year-old daughter Chloe into our small family, along with ambitious plans to transform Ernest's modest lifestyle into something that would impress her friends at the country club. The early years had been challenging but manageable, with Alice making genuine efforts to include me in family activities and traditions. But as Chloe grew older and more socially successful, the dynamic shifted in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. Chloe inherited Alice's natural charm and social intelligence, becoming the kind of popular, well-adjusted child that made parents proud at school events and neighborhood gatherings. I, meanwhile, was the quiet bookworm who preferred computers to people and spent lunch periods in the library coding basic programs on outdated school equipment. Ernest's plumbing business, River City Plumbing, had grown steadily during the Austin boom years, allowing the family to move into an upscale Tarrytown neighborhood where appearances mattered and success was measured by the cars in your driveway and the colleges your children attended. Alice leveraged Ernest's increasing income into a real estate career, becoming one of those agents who specialized in selling the Austin dream to California transplants willing to pay premium prices for Texas charm. The family dynamic crystallized around Alice's vision of suburban perfection, with Chloe cast as the star performer and me relegated to supporting roles or, increasingly, excluded entirely from the narrative Alice crafted about their successful family. Christmas cards featured professional photos of Ernest, Alice, and Chloe in coordinated outfits, while I was either cropped out or absent entirely due to scheduling conflicts that seemed to coincide with every family photo opportunity. High school intensified these patterns as Chloe blossomed into homecoming queen material while I dove deeper into computer programming and web development. While Chloe brought home boyfriends and cheerleading trophies, I was building websites for local businesses and teaching myself advanced coding languages that would later become the foundation of my career. Alice's response to my technical interests ranged from polite disinterest to gentle suggestions that I should try to be more social and develop some practical skills that people actually care about. The turning point came during my senior year when I'd built an inventory management system for a local retailer and earned $15,000 for 3 months of work. Instead of recognizing this as an impressive achievement for a 17-year-old, Alice had worried aloud about whether I was becoming too focused on computers and missing out on normal teenage experiences. Meanwhile, Chloe's acceptance to UT with a partial cheerleading scholarship was celebrated with a family party and announcements to everyone they knew. College provided escape from the daily reminders of not measuring up to Alice's expectations, and I'd thrown myself into computer science studies while building freelance clients on the side. By my junior year, I was earning more from my programming work than most adults in Austin, but when I tried to share my success during holiday visits, the conversation would quickly shift to Chloe's latest sorority activities or Alice's newest real estate sales record. The decision to keep my business success private had evolved gradually, starting with simple frustration at their lack of interest and developing into a deliberate choice to protect my achievements from their dismissive reactions. When Kuntz Tech landed its first major contract with a regional retail chain during my final semester, I debated telling the family but ultimately decided their skepticism would diminish my joy in the accomplishment. Post-graduation, as my company grew from a one-person operation to a team of 12 employees, managing multi-million-dollar accounts, the gap between my actual life and my family's perception of my life became almost comical. Alice would offer career advice about finding stable employment, while I was negotiating contracts worth more than Ernest's annual revenue. Chloe would suggest I network more, while I was speaking at tech conferences and being courted by venture capital firms. The family gatherings became exercises in managing two completely different realities: the successful entrepreneur I actually was, and the directionless disappointment they believed me to be. I'd perfected the art of deflecting questions about my work with vague references to consulting and freelance projects, allowing them to maintain their assumptions while protecting my actual achievements. from their judgment and skepticism. The Christmas visit that changed everything began with Alice's text message 3 days before I was scheduled to arrive. "Clara, he just wanted to give you a heads up that Chloe and her boyfriend will be using the guest room. You'll need to make other arrangements, maybe the couch, or we could set up something in the garage." Sorry for the short notice. The casual cruelty of relegating me to sleeping in the garage while my half-sister's boyfriend got the guest room was so perfectly Alice that I almost had to admire her consistency. I arrived at the Terrytown house on December 23rd, pulling my Tesla Model S into the driveway behind Chloe's new BMW, a graduation gift from Ernest and Alice that had cost more than most people's annual salaries. The contrast wasn't lost on me as I grabbed my overnight bag and walked up to the front door of the house I'd grown up in, now feeling like a barely tolerated visitor seeking charity from relatives who considered my presence an inconvenience. Alice answered the door with her perfectly practiced smile, the one she used with difficult clients and disappointing family members. "Clara, you made it," she said, her tone suggesting surprise that I'd actually shown up despite their accommodation arrangements. Come in, come in. Chloe and Derek are in the living room, and Ernest's in his office handling some paperwork. We're so excited you could join us for the holidays." The house looked exactly the same as it had during my teenage years. Expensive furniture arranged for maximum visual impact. Family photos strategically placed to showcase their success and happiness. Everything coordinated to reflect Alice's vision of upscale suburban perfection. The only photos that included me were old ones from my childhood, before Alice had refined her family narrative to focus primarily on Chloe's achievements and their social standing. Chloe emerged from the living room looking radiant in the way that only comes from a lifetime of being the favored child, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her outfit clearly expensive. "Clara, oh my God, you look the same," she said with the kind of backhanded greeting that Alice had taught her to deliver with a smile. "Mom told me you're still doing the computer thing. That's so cool that you found something you're passionate about, even if it's not very social." Derek, Chloe's boyfriend, turned out to be exactly what I'd expected. A finance major from Dallas, whose family owned car dealerships, someone who spoke confidently about markets and investments while living entirely on his parents' money. He gave me the kind of politely dismissive handshake that men like him reserved for women they didn't consider worth impressing, his attention already shifting back to Chloe before our introduction was complete. The dinner conversation that first night established the dynamics that would define the entire visit. Alice dominated the discussion with stories about her recent real estate successes, emphasizing the expensive homes she'd sold and the high-profile clients she was representing. Chloe talked about her internship at a marketing firm, making it sound like she was revolutionizing the industry rather than making coffee and organizing files. Ernest contributed updates about his plumbing business, mentioning some challenging commercial projects but avoiding any discussion of the financial pressures he was clearly experiencing. When the conversation inevitably turned to me, Alice's questions felt more like a polite interrogation than genuine family interest. "So Clara, are you still doing those website projects? Have you thought about maybe applying for positions at some of the bigger tech companies here in Austin? I know someone who works at Dell, and I'm sure they have entry-level opportunities for someone with your interests." The assumption that I was still scrambling for entry-level work, combined with Alice's helpful tone suggesting she might be able to pull strings for basic employment, was so far from my actual reality that I almost laughed out loud. Instead, I gave the same vague responses I'd been using for years. "Things are going well. I'm staying busy with various new projects. The tech industry is really growing in Austin." But the real humiliation came when Alice showed me to my accommodations for the visit. The garage had been hastily cleared of some storage boxes to make room for an air mattress, with an extension cord running from the house to power a small space heater. "I know it's not ideal," Alice said with false sympathy, "but with Chloe and Derek needing their privacy, and the office being Ernest's workspace, this was really the only option. You'll be comfortable enough for a few nights, right?" The discovery that changed everything came by accident on Christmas Eve morning. when I was helping Ernest move some storage boxes in the garage and noticed a stack of official-looking documents scattered beneath an old tarp. My engineering mind automatically registered the letterhead, Austin Community Bank, and the bold red text that read, "Final Notice of Default," before Ernest quickly gathered them up with obvious embarrassment. "Just some paperwork," he mumbled, but I'd already seen enough to understand that my family's financial situation was far more precarious than their lifestyle suggested. 3 months behind on mortgage payments, with a foreclosure date set for January 15, 2024. The same people who had been treating me like a charity case were facing the loss of their home in less than 3 weeks, and they were too proud or too desperate to ask for help from the daughter they considered a failure. The irony was staggering. While I'd been sleeping on an air mattress in their garage, feeling sorry for myself about their treatment, they'd been lying awake at night wondering how to save the house that had become the symbol of their suburban success. Ernest's plumbing business had apparently taken several major hits during the recent economic uncertainty, with commercial clients delaying projects and residential customers choosing cheaper alternatives. Alice's real estate commissions had dropped significantly, as interest rate increases cooled the Austin market that had been so lucrative for years. I spent the rest of Christmas Eve day researching their exact situation through public records and my network of real estate contacts. The house was worth approximately $650,000, but they owed $580,000 on a mortgage they'd refinanced multiple times to fund Chloe's college expenses and maintain their lifestyle. 3 missed payments totaling $8,400 had triggered the foreclosure process, and their bank was preparing to auction the property to recover their investment. That evening, while lying in the garage, listening to their muffled conversations about exploring options and maybe talking to a bankruptcy attorney, I made the phone call that would flip our family dynamic forever. Janet Mills, my business partner and the manager of our real estate investment arm, answered on the second ring despite the late hour. "Janet, I need you to contact Austin Community Bank first thing tomorrow morning," I said, keeping my voice low to avoid being overheard. "I want to purchase a mortgage debt. The property address is 4127 Westlake Drive, and the account holder is Ernest Jones. I want the full debt transferred to Kunstech Holdings, and I want it completed before the foreclosure date." Janet, who'd handled dozens of similar transactions for our investment portfolio, immediately understood the business implications. "Clara, that's your family's address. Are you sure about this?" Mixing business with family can get complicated very quickly, especially when it involves their primary residence. But I'd already thought through all the complications and decided they were worth the risk. "They're going to lose the house anyway, Janet. At least this way they'll be dealing with someone who actually cares about their well-being instead of a bank that just wants to recover its money. I can structure this as a private mortgage with reasonable terms, maybe even help them stabilize their finances." The more I explained my reasoning, the more the plan made sense from both a business and personal perspective. Kunstech had been looking for additional real estate investments in the Austin market, and this particular property was in a desirable neighborhood with good appreciation potential. More importantly, it would give me the leverage to address decades of being treated as the family disappointment while potentially helping them save face and maintain some dignity. "I'll need you to handle this through intermediary companies," I continued, outlining the structure that would keep my involvement hidden until I chose to reveal it. "Use the Delaware Holding Company for the initial purchase, then transfer ownership to my personal investment account. I want clean paperwork showing that they're dealing with a private investor who's willing to work with them on modified terms." Janet agreed to handle the transaction, warning me again about the emotional complexities of becoming my own family's landlord, but she also understood that sometimes family relationships need dramatic interventions to address fundamental imbalances, and that money could be a tool for positive change if used thoughtfully. By the time I ended the call, the plan was set in motion. Christmas morning would bring more than just presents under the tree. It would bring a complete reversal of power dynamics that had defined our family for 30 years. Christmas morning arrived with the kind of crisp Austin winter air that made everything feel electric with possibility. I'd spent the night in the garage going over the documents Janet had overnighted to a nearby FedEx store, reviewing every detail of the mortgage transfer that had been completed at 9 a.m. sharp on Christmas Eve. The paperwork was perfect, legally bulletproof, and about to transform the family dynamic in ways that none of them could imagine. Alice had been bustling around the kitchen since 7 a.m., preparing her traditional Christmas brunch with the kind of manic energy that comes from trying to maintain normal routines while your world is secretly falling apart. Ernest sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and financial documents, the stress of their situation evident in the deep lines around his eyes, and the way his hands shook slightly as he reviewed bills they couldn't afford to pay. Chloe and Derek were still asleep in the guest room that I'd been deemed unworthy to use. Their privileged exhaustion from staying up late watching movies and planning their post-graduation European vacation funded by money that should have been going toward mortgage payments. The irony of their carefree attitude while sleeping in a house that was 3 weeks away from foreclosure would have been amusing if it wasn't so tragic. I waited until they were all gathered in the living room, opening presents and maintaining the cheerful facade that families use to avoid discussing serious problems during holidays. Alice handed out gifts with forced enthusiasm, expensive items purchased on credit cards to maintain appearances while their financial foundation crumbled. Ernest smiled and thanked everyone for their thoughtfulness, never mentioning that he'd been awake most of the night, calculating whether they could sell enough possessions to make a meaningful dent in their debt. "I have something for the family," I announced, pulling out the manila envelope that contained documents that would rewrite our entire relationship. "It's not exactly a traditional Christmas gift, but I think you'll find it interesting." Alice's expression immediately shifted to polite concern, probably expecting me to present some awkward homemade craft project or inappropriate personal disclosure that would embarrass everyone. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first document, a certified letter from Austin Community Bank confirming the sale of mortgage debt for the property at 4127 Westlake Drive. "It seems there's been a change in ownership regarding your mortgage," I said, watching their faces as they tried to process what I was saying. "The bank sold your debt to a private investor who's interested in working out more favorable terms." Ernest's face went pale as he realized I somehow knew about the foreclosure proceedings they'd been hiding from everyone, including Chloe. "Clara, how do you know about that?" "We haven't told anyone about our financial situation." His voice carried a mixture of shame and confusion, the tone of someone whose private troubles had been unexpectedly exposed. "Because," I said, pulling out the second document, the deed transfer that showed my name as the new mortgage holder, "I'm the private investor who bought your debt. As of yesterday morning, I own your mortgage, and therefore your house. Congratulations, you're all now my tenants." The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced in that house. Alice's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to speak, underwater, while Ernest stared at the documents with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of reality had just been turned upside down. Chloe looked back and forth between me and her parents, slowly realizing that her computer nerd half-sister had somehow become the person who controlled whether they had a place to live. "That's impossible," Alice finally managed to say, her voice cracking with disbelief. "You don't have that kind of money. You work on websites. You sleep in our garage." The last sentence came out as almost a whisper, as if she was testing whether her own words still made sense in this new reality. I pulled out my phone and showed them the Kunstech website, complete with client testimonials and news articles about our recent contracts. "Actually, I own a software company that generates about $12 million in annual revenue. I've been successful for quite a while now, but you never seemed interested in learning about my actual life." Derek, who had been silent throughout the entire exchange, spoke up with genuine confusion. "Wait, so you're rich? Like, actually wealthy?" The question seemed to sum up everyone's bewilderment at the complete reversal of everything they thought they knew about the family hierarchy. "Rich enough to buy your house as a Christmas present to myself," I replied, enjoying the poetic justice of the moment more than I'd expected. 6 months later, I stood in the same living room where I'd revealed my ownership of their house, but everything about our family dynamic had fundamentally changed. The formal dining table that had once been reserved for special occasions now hosted our monthly family business meetings, where we discussed mortgage terms, household improvements, and the gradual rebuilding of relationships that had been damaged by years of assumptions and misunderstandings. Alice had undergone the most dramatic transformation, both professionally and personally. The humbling experience of learning that her unsuccessful stepdaughter was actually wealthy enough to save their home had forced her to confront decades of unexamined prejudices about success and worth. She'd also discovered that her real estate skills, when properly supported and directed, could be incredibly valuable in a different context. "Clara, the Henderson property closed yesterday," Alice reported, pulling out her laptop to show me the latest transaction details. "That's our third successful flip this quarter, and the profit margin was even better than we projected." Her tone was professional but warm, the voice of someone who had learned to respect my business judgment while contributing her own expertise to our joint real estate ventures. I'd hired Alice to manage the property acquisition side of Kunstek's expanding real estate investment portfolio, a decision that had surprised everyone, including myself. But her knowledge of the Austin market and her natural sales abilities had proven invaluable when properly channeled toward projects with solid financial foundations, rather than maintaining appearances for social status. Ernest had also found new purpose in our restructured family business dynamic. His plumbing expertise had become essential for our property renovation projects, and I'd provided the capital for him to expand River City Plumbing into a full-service contracting operation. "The vintage condo project downtown is ahead of schedule and under budget," he reported with obvious pride. Having our own construction capabilities has been a game-changer for project timelines. The financial stress that had been slowly destroying Ernest's health and marriage had lifted entirely once they understood that their mortgage was now held by someone who wanted them to succeed rather than simply recover debt. I'd restructured their payments at below-market rates and established a equity-sharing arrangement that would eventually allow them to buy back ownership of the house if they weren't in a man's chose to do so. Chloe's adjustment to the new reality had been the most interesting to observe. The revelation that her nerdy half-sister was actually more financially successful than anyone in the family had initially shattered her self-image as the golden child destined for greatness. But it had also freed her from the pressure to be perfect and allowed her to explore interests that actually matched her abilities rather than Alice's expectations. "I've been thinking about changing my major to graphic design," Chloe announced during one of our family dinners, her voice carrying a tentative hopefulness. "I know it's not as prestigious as finance, but I'm actually good at it, and there seem to be real opportunities in Austin's creative economy." The fact that she was asking for my opinion rather than expecting automatic approval marked a significant shift in our relationship dynamic. Derek had gradually faded from the picture as Chloe developed more confidence and independence, their relationship having been built primarily on his family's money and her need for validation rather than genuine compatibility. His departure had been amicable but inevitable once Chloe realized she didn't need to define herself through someone else's achievements. The most meaningful change, however, had been in my relationship with Ernest. The father who had spent years caught between his loyalty to me and his desire to maintain peace with Alice had finally found the courage to acknowledge how my treatment had affected him. "I should have stood up for you more," he'd told me during one of our private conversations about the family business. "I was so afraid of conflict that I let Alice make you feel unwelcome in your own home." Our weekly father-daughter lunches had become a cherished tradition, time when we could talk honestly about business, family, and the future we were building together. Ernest had proven to be an insightful advisor for the construction side of our real estate investments, and I'd gained the respect and recognition from my father that I'd been seeking my entire life. The lesson wasn't just about money or power, though those had certainly been useful tools for changing our family dynamic. It was about the importance of seeing people clearly rather than making assumptions based on limited information, and about how success can take many different forms that aren't always visible from the outside. Sometimes the people we underestimate are simply choosing not to reveal their full capabilities until the moment is right for dramatic revelation.